Welcome to Mobile Programming Online class for STIW 2043. Okay, today basically I'm going to talk about a basic offline database. So we're going to look at how we can use offline database. Means that the database is in the phone storage, in the application directory, and the application basically handle basic database operation using SQL statement. So basically we're going to look at 4 operations: add, delete, update, and search, and another one, to show the data from database into list view. Okay, so we have these 4 operations: the CRUD operation, add, delete, update, search, and we have 2 data here that we want to insert, name and metric number. So when we press add, so data are going to be displayed here. Press delete, so the data that we put here, the metric number that we use as our primary key, will be deleted. Update data, will be update name and use the metric number as a unique key. Search, so we're going to search data from database. Okay, so create new project and go ahead and design this layout. So as you can see, the layout here I'm using is linear layout. However, there's a main layout here. There's a main view. We call it view as a scroll view. There's a reason why I use this. Scroll view basically allow your application to be scrollable. This is very useful if your application running on a very small screen, so that it will allow your interface or your graphical user interface to be scrollable, and you can access all of the component that out of reach from the screen. And however, scroll view can only accept one child layout, so I'm using my linear layout, so I'm no longer use the constraint layout here. So I use linear layout, vertical, and within the linear layout verticals there are 3 sub layout: vertical layout, horizontal layout, and then a vertical layout. Okay, so this basically represent or hosting 4 component. So you can see here it basically hosts text view and 2 edit text, 2 text view and 2 edit text. Okay, in linear layout horizontal here, this is basically as a parent to all 4 buttons. So here I'm using horizontal because the button moved to the right, so horizontal layout. And the last layout hold a list view, and this is where the data from database will be populated, will be shown here. The metric number will be listed here. Okay, so design your layout first before we can move on to the programming. So go ahead and do that. Okay, you might want to pause here and design your interface based on this layout. Alright, moving on to the programming. So it is basically quite simple programming. So what you need to do now within your main activity is basically to define this object. Okay, so the database that we're using here is called SQLite database. Okay, so this is the class that handle the offline database operation. So define the object for the SQL database and assign the database object to null at first, initially. And we have 2 buttons here, 2 edit text here, edit ed names and ed metrics. And within the onCreate method, we we make a reference to the edit text and ed matrix and ed name. Okay, we get the metric number and name from the layout. And then within the onCreate method also we create database using createDB method, and the method is basically down here. This is the createDB method. So this method basically in charge with the checking the database availability and also create the database if it does not exist. Okay, so the instruction for this, db1 equal this open or create database. The name of the database here is db student, and the type of access is private access to database. The SQL statement here, SQL create table if not exist. The name of the table in the db student is student, and the field that we're going to use here is metric number as a varchar and not null. Name varchar, so type varchar, string type, and we set metric number as our primary key so that we're not going to have any duplicate entry later. And then execute the string SQL statement here. So db1 basically will execute the SQL create statement. So that basically for the create database. So within the onCreate method also there's a one method called load all list. So this method basically in charge with loading all the content from the database to the list view. Okay, so we're going to look at this method. So the method basically down here. Okay, so this is basically the method for load all information from database. So the method basically use array list, and this is the array list object. So we define the array list object, and then we define the list view and the list view reference to list metric. We make a simple SQL search, select all from student, and we use cursor class object to access and to hold the query from database. Okay, so once we db1.query, it will basically select all content from the table student into cursor C. So now the cursor C basically is going to hold the content of the database, and then we can use it to traverse the table student. So now C object is handling student data. So this statement basically, this if selection here basically just to make sure that there's a content in the database. So if it basically get count of the data, how many data is in the table. So if it return more than 0 means that there's a data in the database, and especially it's going to move to the first statement, sorry, to the first field, to the first content record, and then this is where we traverse the database. So if you have one data, 2 data, 10 data, so this statement basically will basically loop the content of the database. So the content start from index 0 and to the maximum number of the record that available in database C object. This statement basically will assign value from database that we get from the C object, get string, get column index metric. Okay, so we get the field metric as the field metric and assign to db metric, and we use the list, the array list here, and add the content to the array list, and because we want to use this later in our list view and populate the list view with the content from list metric array. Okay, and then move next. Okay, basically move to the next record, until the end. So this is basically moving to the next record, and then the loop continue until the end. This part basically to populate your list view. So your list view is going to get the data from the list metric array here. So this is where the data is being populated into list view, and then set the adapter to this adapter of the array adapter object. Okay, so this basically will load all the content or refresh the content of the database if we perform any add, delete, update to the database. Okay, so when we run the application, so the application basically going to, let me try to run this again. Okay, so the first thing is going to load the content of the database. So the content that we are using here is we are showing in the list view only the metric number. Okay, so there's two data in the database, and this metric number, all the metric number is going to be listed in the database. Next, when we add data, so this is the button add data to database. So let's say John Day, metric number 321123, add. Okay, you can see that the data is automatically updated in the list view down here. So we're going to look at the add method. So this is the add method, insert data. So quite simple method. So what we do here is to get the value from the edit text, the name and the metrics edit text, assigned to name and metric string variables, and we write a simple SQL statement, insert into table student, metric, name, and together with their value. Okay, so this is basically SQL insert. Make sure, so there's a one problem, not problem, but sometimes you misplace the SQL statement. So look at this part. Okay, you can see that how the statement close. You have this semicolon here. This is a must. Without this, your SQL statement is going to get a problem. You cannot add data to the database if you're missing this statement. Okay, this is a complete database. This is complete SQL statement to insert data into database, and then just use the DB object to execute the SQL statement, and then just toast that the data has been successfully inserted. So once the data has complete the operation to insert data into database, you just call the method load all list again, and it will basically refresh your list view. Okay, so yeah, it's quite small, so it's quite simple method. Of course, you don't have any data collision here, handling, so that basically you can just use any you can use try and catch to handle if the data is being is a duplicate data. Okay, the metric number here, in this example, if you run this and you insert the same metric twice, the application is going to quit. Because the metric number that we define here as a primary key. So as a primary key, you cannot have two data of the same in the database. Okay, so that basically for insert data. The second method here, and oh sorry, you need to call this because we just use view method. You need to call this from your layout. Okay, so you can see here the on-click method referring to insert data. And basically it goes the same with the delete and also update. So you can see the delete method here. There's a delete method here, and it basically performs the same operation. So since I want to delete based on the key metric, so I just get the metric metric from the edit text metric, ed metrics. So the SQL statement here, SQL delete from student where metric equal metric. Okay, and then just the db1 object execute the SQL delete, and those the delete data operation successfully. Okay, and then you just refresh back the list view to load back all the lists. It's so simple, straightforward instruction. To update data also the same. So here we're going to use metric number as our key to update names. Okay, so the SQL statement also here the same. Update student set name equal name, because you want to update only name, not the metric number. And the keyword here is the metric. So where metric equal metric. So db1 exec SQL, use the SQL update here to update the content, and finally toast and load all this again, update the list view. The only different here is the search data. Okay, so the search data, the search method here basically will search data from database. For example, I want to search for 21345. So when you search, it will basically show the name that belong to the metric number. Okay, so that's what search method is about. So the instruction basically start from the metric number, because you want to search for the metric number, and perform the SQL statement for the search. Select all from student where metric equal metric. Okay, equal the variable metric here, and use the cursor and perform db query, raw query to the using the SQL statement. So once you get that, so first you determine if there's a data in the query, because if there's a data in the query, at least you're going to get one data. So we use if statement here only because you want to get only one data. So the only data that it found, that basically the data that is going to show back to the interface. So c.move first, move to the first data and get the value from column index name. Okay, we just want to get the name. We only have one data. So if more than one data here, you might need to get more than one column. And then set the ed name to the set text to the db name variable here, and those data found. If data is equal 0, you just toast back data not found. Okay, if the data is not in database, it's basically going to toast data not found. Okay, so that basically it. It's quite simple, and of course you need to have some fancy operations, such as for example, if you add data or you delete data, you might need to use, are you sure you want to delete data? There's a dialog box there to confirm to user, to request confirmation from user to add, delete, update or search or whatever that you might want to use first. Okay, so this is basically as bare bone as possible, and basically it allow you to access data from the database. Okay, so basically the data, the database student, the DB student is a physical file, and the way that you can access DB student from database in your phone storage, in the application storage, is to use what we call the Android device monitor. Okay, so to see the physical content of the database, you can use Android device monitor, and you might need to wait a little bit for the application to be loaded. It might take some time. Okay, so this is the AVD, this is the ADM. So ADM basically allow for you to access to your phone or to your emulator, access to the file storage, the file explorer, or the storage of the emulator. So for this example, the application name, my application name is slumberger.basic offline database. Okay, so this is the file that I want to access. So you need to access the file explorer. Okay, so the file explorer of the of this object, the AVD of this 554 WBGA API 23 5.1. So you can access from data, folder data, get to the application name. So com.slumberger.basic offline database, and you can see there's a database folder here. So you can get, this is the database. You can see here DB student, and the database name here is also DB student. Okay, so to get the database, you need to download, you need to get this out, you need to pull this out from your virtual device. So to pull this, you just press pull a file from the device. Okay, so you can put anywhere, for example on your desktop, save the file. You can see now the database file is on your desktop. Okay, to see the content of the file, you can use any application such as a DB browser for SQLite. You can download this for free. So this application basically allow you to access the content of the database. So you just drag and drop to the DB browser for SQLite, and from here you can see your database structure. You can see your table, your field, the type of the database schema, and you can browse the data in your database. Now you can see here the content of metric and name, your record here. So basically this is just to confirm your database operation and your database file. You can also execute SQL statement inside here and basically perform the execution of the SQL to the table here. Alright, so that basically how you can view the content of your database on your computer. Alright, so once you enable that, sometimes your enable ADB integration suddenly shut down, so you might need to enable this again. So be careful on that if you are unable to run the application on your AVD or on your real phone. So that basically conclude for offline database. Okay, so offline database is very useful for you to use in your project, but be careful because offline database, once your application uninstall, the database is gone. You cannot retrieve back the database, and it's going to be deleted. So the next topic, we're going to discuss about online database access, and so stay tuned. Thank you.